The letter came folded in a brown envelope, smudged with dust and rain, like it had taken a long journey just to find her. Mira held it carefully, unsure whether to open it with hope or fear. Her name was printed in bold letters at the top. Invitation to the annual State Educators Awards. She stared at the gold-embossed writing like it was a joke. Her? Invited to an event held at the prestigious Rose Hall Grand Hotel. The same hotel where governors dined and senators toasted billion-naira deals? She looked down at her hands, still cracked from washing dishes that morning, then back at the letter. It had to be a mistake. Maybe someone meant to send it to another Mira. One with pedigree, one with power, one who didn't patch her slippers with thread, or wear a thrift store blouse sewn up at the side. But there it was in clean ink. We are honored to invite Mrs. Mira Okoye to receive a special recognition award for community impact in education. For a long moment, she didn't move. The buzzing fan spun overhead, rattling slightly. In the corner, her daughter Kemi stirred from sleep, curled on a mattress too thin for her small frame. Mira finally sat down, legs trembling. She thought about declining. She had no money for new clothes, not for makeup, not for shoes, definitely not for a ticket to Rose Hall. But something inside her refused to crumble. She whispered, "I may not have what they have, but I'll go. If they laugh, let them laugh." That night, she borrowed a dress from her neighbor, 2 sizes too big, pinned at the waist. The only shoes she had were a pair she'd bought secondhand from a roadside seller. They were scuffed at the sides and one heel clicked louder than the other, but she polished them until they almost sparkled. As she rode the bus to Rose Hall the next evening, she sat stiffly, holding the envelope like a shield. Other passengers eyed her mismatched outfit, but she kept her gaze out the window. The hotel gates loomed ahead, guarded by men in black suits and polished shoes. She stepped down from the bus, wobbling slightly in her heels. Cameras flashed in the distance. Guests in glittering gowns stepped out of sleek cars. And then, the laughter started. Not from the security guards, but from a group of young women near the entrance, all with flawless makeup and flowing gowns. One nudged another and pointed. "She's wearing bend-down select shoes," one whispered. "She came here to serve drinks?" Another added, barely hiding her smirk. Mira felt her throat tighten. Her hands clutched the letter in her purse. For a split second, she considered turning around. But she didn't. She walked forward, heart pounding, each step clicking loudly on the marble tiles. She didn't know it yet, but someone was watching her from the top floor balcony. Someone who wasn't laughing. Just as she reached the main hall doors, a tall man in a black suit stepped forward and said, "Mrs. Okoye, the governor would like to see you. Right now. Backstage." Mira followed the tall man through the wide hallway of the Rose Hall Grand, her footsteps echoing against marble floors so polished they reflected the chandeliers above. People passed by in perfumes and pearls, barely glancing at her, unless it was to raise an eyebrow or stifle a laugh. She kept her head low, gripping her purse with both hands. The second-hand shoes clicked unevenly, but she tried to walk tall. It wasn't easy when every eye seemed to whisper the same thing. She doesn't belong here. The usher led her through a gold-trimmed door marked authorized personnel only and down a quieter hallway. At the end stood a young woman with a headset and a clipboard. She barely looked up. "Mira Okoye?" the woman asked, flipping through a page. Mira nodded. "Wait here." No smile. No welcome. She stood by the wall, just outside the backstage curtain. On the other side, she could hear music playing, cameras flashing, glasses clinking. Names being called out, applause rolling like ocean waves. And still she waited. Minutes crawled by. A few staff walked past, glancing at her with confusion or curiosity. One even whispered, "Are you lost, Ma?" Mira straightened her shoulders. "I was invited," she said softly but firmly. "I have an award." The woman blinked, then disappeared around a corner without another word. Alone again. She thought of Kemi, waiting at home, probably eating plain rice without stew. She thought of her mother, who died never being recognized for anything but surviving. She thought of the children at her little community school. Most without uniforms, some without shoes, but who clapped the loudest when they passed spelling tests. Maybe I should leave, she thought. Maybe I came too far. She turned slightly toward the exit. And that's when a deep voice said, "Mrs. Okoye?" She spun around. A sharply dressed man in his 40s stood behind her. He wasn't smiling, but there was kindness in his eyes. "Yes," she said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed white envelope. "From the governor," he said. "He asked that you receive this before the program starts." Mira blinked. "The governor?" He nodded. "And he'd also like to meet you personally," he said. "He owes you something." Before she could speak, a voice echoed from the speakers inside the grand hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next honoree is someone whose quiet acts of kindness started a ripple effect that changed our entire education system." The man beside her smiled gently. "Please welcome Mrs. Mira Okoye." Mira froze. Her name echoed again, louder this time. The curtain ahead was rising. The spotlight was waiting, and the governor himself was stepping toward the microphone, ready to tell her story. Myra's heart thudded so loudly she thought the whole auditorium could hear it. Her legs felt heavy as stone, but somehow she took one step, then another, as the usher gently guided her through the side of the stage. The curtain was only halfway open now. The bright stage lights pierced through the darkness like 1,000 eyes, searching. Voices swirled, claps, whispers, murmurs. Mira could barely think. The man at the podium, broad-shouldered, commanding, familiar, turned slightly. Their eyes met. The governor, Governor Adewale Akintola, former senator, former commissioner of education, a man who rarely smiled, but right now he was smiling. At her. He gestured subtly. A signal. Mira stepped onto the stage. The silence was surreal. The laughter that had greeted her at the gate was gone, swallowed by confusion and curiosity. A few people clapped, polite, unsure. Cameras clicked. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Who is she?" Mira stood center stage, eyes scanning the crowd. Gowns, tuxedos, glittering necklaces, judgmental eyes. She was surrounded by the very people who had dismissed her only moments ago. And now they were watching like something was about to happen. The governor cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. "Most of you don't know her, but I do." The room hushed. He looked at Mira. "Do you remember Ogunlana Primary School, ma'am? 15 years ago, you brought a box of notebooks, pencils, and used textbooks. You left it at the principal's office. You asked them to give it to the students who needed it most." Mira blinked. The memory hit her like thunder. She had almost forgotten. The governor turned back to the crowd. "One of those children was a boy named Sola Akintola. My nephew. His father had just died. His mother couldn't afford anything for school. But those books, they kept him in class. And that boy eventually won a scholarship, then another. Today, he's helping me design a statewide education reform that's reaching over 70,000 students." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The governor paused, voice steady but thick with emotion. "It all began with a woman who had little but gave what she could. A woman no one knew. No title. No fame. Just heart." He turned toward Mira. "Mrs. Okoye, today, we know your name." Thunderous applause erupted. People who had once turned their backs now rose to their feet. A standing ovation rolled through the hall, rising like a wave. The same women who had whispered about her shoes were now clapping with wide eyes. But Mira wasn't smiling. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, not even from pride, but from a single thought that pulsed in her chest like a heartbeat. So I mattered after all. Just then, the side door opened, and a young man in a tailored suit walked toward the stage, holding a velvet box. Mira didn't recognize him at first, until he said, "Auntie Mira, it's me, Sola." The young man stepped onto the stage, his presence calm yet commanding. He held the box with both hands like it was sacred. Mira stared at him, trying to reconcile the sharp-featured man in the navy blue suit with the barefoot boy she once saw crying behind the school's broken chalkboard, clutching an empty lunchbox. "Sola?" she whispered. He smiled and nodded, eyes already wet. "You probably don't remember. I was the boy who took the last pencil from the box you dropped off. I guarded it like it was gold." Mira gasped, covering her mouth. The governor stepped aside and let Sola take the microphone. The hall fell silent again, all eyes on the man who once had nothing, just like the woman standing beside him. "I was 9, Sola began, when she showed up at our school. No cameras, no speeches, just 3 bags of books and writing supplies. She said she didn't have money, but she believed we mattered." He paused, voice trembling. "You don't understand what it meant to be seen when you feel invisible. She gave us more than school supplies. She gave us dignity." A murmur swept the room. Some moved to wipe their eyes, others bowed their heads. Mira stood frozen, emotion thick in her throat. That moment, that donation, it had cost her more than most knew. She had sold her late husband's only wristwatch to buy those materials. At the time, she wondered if it even made a difference. Now, the answer stood in front of her, holding a velvet box. "I've waited years to find you," Sola continued. "And today, I finally can say this. You changed the course of my life." He turned to the governor, who nodded. Together, they opened the box. Inside was a silver medal, engraved with her name, Mira Okoye, for planting seeds that grew a forest. Gasps. Then thunderous applause, louder than before. Myra's hands trembled as Sola placed the medal around her neck. A wave of emotion washed over her, too vast to name. Shame, pride, relief, grief, joy, all tangled together in one unstoppable tide. Then the governor stepped forward once more. "This year we're launching a new initiative, the Okoye Education Fund, a program to support underserved schools across the state, named after a woman who didn't wait to be rich or known to make a difference." Another round of applause. Even the press section was standing now, cameras flashing nonstop. But Mira wasn't thinking about any of that. Her heart was still caught in the quiet truth of it all. The seeds she'd once sown in silence had grown into a legacy far beyond anything she imagined. As the applause faded, a reporter pushed forward and asked loudly, "Mrs. Okoye, what inspired you to give, even when you had so little?" Mira turned slowly, looked out at the sea of faces, and finally spoke. "Because once, I was that child too." The room was silent again, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. Mira stepped forward, her voice soft but strong. "I grew up in a house with holes in the roof," she began. "My mother raised 4 of us alone. I remember sitting under a leaking ceiling, using pages from old newspapers to practice writing my name. People leaned in. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. I was once turned away from school because I didn't have a pencil," Mira continued, her fingers grazing the metal on her chest. "So when I got older, even though I had nothing, I promised myself, no child near me would feel that kind of shame." She paused, eyes glassy. The governor nodded slowly, visibly moved. "I sold my husband's watch that day," she added. "It was the last thing of value I had. But I don't regret it, because that pencil reached someone, and that someone grew into a man who's now changing lives." A soft gasp floated from the crowd. Somewhere near the back, someone stood. Then another. Then another. Soon, the room rose again. Not just in applause, but in awe. The camera lights flashed, but Mira didn't flinch. For once, she didn't feel like someone caught in the wrong room. She belonged here, not because of a gown or a title, but because of who she had always been. After the ceremony, the banquet began. She sat at the front table beside the governor with Sola at her right. Fancy dishes were placed in front of her. Meals she couldn't pronounce, drinks she'd never tasted. But she smiled politely, quietly. From the far side of the room, the same group of women who had laughed at her earlier whispered and stared. One of them stood slowly and walked over, her heels clicking with less confidence this time. "Excuse me," the woman said. eyes darting between Mira and the metal. "I didn't realize. We didn't know /." Mira turned to her with a calm expression. "It's all right," she said gently. "You weren't supposed to." The woman opened her mouth to reply but closed it again. She walked away. Sola leaned closer and said, "That was powerful." Mira didn't respond. She was thinking about her mother again, and how she would have wept to see this night. She imagined her sitting at that same table, holding her hand, whispering, "You see, my daughter?" Your kindness echoed. Later that night, as the ballroom began to empty, Mira stepped outside. The stars blinked above the city skyline. Her second-hand shoes still clicked on the pavement, but now they sounded like music. She stood in the cool night breeze, taking it all in. Just then, the governor's assistant approached with an envelope and said, "Ma'am, the governor would like to offer you a position on the state's Education Advisory Board." Mira looked down at her hands. The same hands that once held broken chalk, now being asked to shape policy. The envelope was heavy in Myra's hand, the paper thick and embossed with the state's official seal. Inside it was an offer letter. Position: Special Advisor on Grassroots Educational Development. Honorarium: 6 figures. Purpose: to guide the future of students like the one she once reached. Mira stood frozen on the steps of Rose Hall Grand Hotel. Her life had once felt so small, tucked between washing buckets and blackboards, but now the world had cracked open like morning light. The same second-hand shoes still hugged her feet. The same worn bag clung to her side. But something had shifted. Not her appearance, her power. A car pulled up quietly. Sola stepped out and opened the door. "Let me take you home, Auntie." She hesitated, then smiled. Home, yes. But her home wasn't the old room with the flickering bulb anymore. She had been offered an apartment by the state, a modest but elegant place near the capital's education hub. Fully furnished, fully hers. As the car rolled through the night, she passed neighborhoods that once ignored her. Billboards blinked by, one of them displaying a new government slogan, "Every child matters, a future built by many hands." Below it, her name was listed in small print. When she arrived at the new apartment, she walked through every room slowly, running her hand along polished wood, clean counters, smooth walls. But the part that made her cry was the desk. A simple wooden desk with a chair beside it. It reminded her of the one she once sat at in a crowded classroom, years ago, under a leaking roof. She lit a candle, sat down, pulled out a notebook, and began to write her first official proposal. A program to provide free notebooks and pencils to every public school in rural communities. Simple tools, huge impact. Weeks passed. Myra's face made the news softly at first, then everywhere. Not as a celebrity, but as a story, a lesson, proof that dignity doesn't need designer clothes, that one quiet act can become a movement. She never responded to the online comments. She didn't need to. She just kept showing up to work, listening, planning, building. One afternoon, she returned to Rose Hall, this time for the launch of her education initiative. The hall was filled with young teachers, policymakers, and community leaders. Before the event began, the governor stepped onto the stage and took the mic. Many people walk into this room with titles, but some walk in carrying legacy, he said, turning toward her seat. She didn't just walk in with second-hand shoes that day. She walked us into a better future. The crowd rose again. Applause thundered. But this time Mira stood with them. Not above them. Not beneath them. Among them. She smiled and whispered under her breath. It was never about the shoes. Then she stepped forward, one foot after the other, toward the future she helped create. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Thank you. We hope to see you in our next video.